Right. Self-defense is a affirmative defense. It's a big self-defense. It's not one of those things that you're going to just whisk through in a day, or after you teach it, you're going to neglect from bringing it back into the classroom. So it was something that I constantly iterated.
All right, folks, this case is all about George Zimmerman's state of mind. What was going through his mind at the time of this altercation? What the prosecution's bringing in is maybe this is part of it. Maybe this is part of his background. Dr. Jason Johnson here with us, HLN contributor, professor of political science at Hiram College. And he actually talked to George Zimmerman's professor at Seminole State College of Florida. So, Jason, tell us about these classes and what people were saying about this case.
Well, it's really interesting. Of course, the entire campus was concerned about this. Zimmerman actually wasn't a very good student. And the one class he did well in was Dr. Carter's class. He actually got D's and most other things. He was actually on academic probation for most of his time there. But what I thought was really interesting is a lot of the students and the faculty I spoke to, they said, we get a lot of wannabe cops here. They actually said that on campus. They're like, we try and weed those guys out, but sometimes they get through.
Do you think the prosecution wanted this in because they knew of his knowledge of the stand your ground law and thinking, okay, he knew this, so he felt almost protected in the aftermath of shooting Trayvon Martin?
I think if you draw upon what you learned in class, I don't think it was when he encountered Trayvon. I think it was afterwards. Look, if you just shot someone and you know, okay, what do I know about self-defense? What have I learned in class that can cover this up? I think that really comes into play. He can't pretend that he didn't know how to tell a defensible story after this happened.
Yeah, the flip side of that, though, is the defense would say, look, even if you know certain things, how are you going to create the perfect scenario afterwards? After all, you don't know who might have been looking, who might have seen something. How are you assessing that situation so fast, especially when police, he says, came seconds after?
I can come up with a story 15 seconds after I knock over my mom's favorite vase before she gets downstairs.
Wow.
I mean, and so if you think your life has flashed before your eyes and you have 149 hours of training in criminal justice, you can come up with a story. And I think that's something that helps the prosecution.
We saw Zimmerman smile today. You don't often see that. He's very stoic in the courtroom. You're a professor. Wouldn't it be difficult to testify?
I can't imagine, and they're all probably hearing this right now, I can't imagine testifying against any of my former students, and that would be hard. And I suspect that, Professor Carter, he's like, I can't see this. This kid had an A in my class. It probably humanized George Zimmerman. I mean, some people may have thought it was glib, but I think it put a human face on him.
It's interesting because at one point he mentioned the part about, well, if someone's coming at you with deadly force, I'm paraphrasing, then you would have to respond. There's a light moment. Everybody laughs, including George Zimmerman. But we're talking about the moment that Trayvon Martin was killed.
Right.
Do you think that was appropriate for Zimmerman? I know the whole courtroom's laughing.
Right.
Is that appropriate for Zimmerman to laugh
I can imagine some parents that were on that jury that didn't think it was very funny at all. Look, you'd rather look serious, you'd rather look bored, but any levity, let that come from the witness stand, not by somebody who's on trial for murder.
So the prosecution is painting a picture of, look, this guy wanted to be a cop. He couldn't be. He took the law into his own hands that night when Trayvon Martin was minding his own business because he wanted to be a cop and he was acting like a cop and he even spoke holster like a cop would be. So that is damaging, I think.
I do think it's damaging, especially if anybody on the jury has experience with those kinds of people. That Paul Blart sort of character who's like, well, hey, I want to put my authority, respect my authority. If they've experienced that kind of person, then this really does hurt how George Zimmerman looks.
So, Jason, at the end of today, we talk about the gun, the DNA evidence, the fact that we remember yesterday one of George Zimmerman's friends talking about how Trayvon Martin reached out and grabbed that gun. Yet we learned today there's no DNA evidence on the gun that relates to Trayvon Martin, the defense pushing back on that. But how big do you think this kind of evidence could be?
That's major, because you got to recognize everybody on this jury right now, they've seen CSI, they've seen the first 48, and it's hard to believe that Trayvon Martin was really beating this man down if you can't find any DNA. We have the pictures. We know there was a fight. But if there's no DNA, it's hard to believe that Zimmerman could have been that afraid. It's not all going to get wiped away in the wind.
So this case is not over. In the beginning, first few days, people were saying the prosecution, their case is gone. But not so. We've heard that a case is like a roller coaster. They have days, ups and downs, and the defense is yet to go.
And I think that really plays a role. I think what we sometimes forget is that we get to sit and discuss this every evening. The jurors can't do that. They have to go home and process this information. So how this appears to them, the waves of information are very different from how it seems to us.
And Trayvon's mom expecting to testify, that will be difficult.
Right.
Absolutely.
You always wonder what jurors process. You can never quite pinpoint it until that case is over, and that's one of the big problems here.
Good point.
All right.
Jason, stand by. Thanks
Jason,
so much.
good to talk to you.
So as we wrap up court coverage